Hi friends, I'm Abby and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking you through my favourite books of 2022 so far. These are books that I have read between January and the end of June, so not taking into account any of my July reads. I've narrowed it down to 5, and these are all 5 stars and that I have really loved them, and I wanted to highlight them more and show them off. Give these books a show off, they deserve it, they're amazing, so let's just gush about them. This is the second video that I'm filming today, and I got very hot filming my book haul and the thumbnail for that book haul, which was just I don't have the arm strength to hold up that many books. I'm warm. I'm warm. So best books. One of the first books that I read actually a couple of these are ones that I read right at the beginning. Oh, January was hitting it out the park. So one of the first books that I read in 2022, and I actually have read the whole trilogy now, is The Shadow of What Was Lost by James Islington. This is an epic fantasy trilogy, following multiple perspectives. At the beginning of the book, you are introduced to Davian and and a couple of his friends, and they are in a school setting. Now, 20 years prior to this, there was a change in leadership within this world, and the magic users are now controlled by this agency. So everyone that has magic are put into these schools where they are trained and controlled. And anyone with magic is sort of looked down upon by the rest of the population, and Dave and his friends are magic users. It definitely goes away from that. That is the beginning book. You are introduced to this sort of threat from beyond the wall. There's this threat from the north that has been this evil that has been around for many years, but that has been controlled by this wall, and you're presented with that this threat is rising, and our characters are going to end up with something to do with it. And I really liked our core group of characters. There's another character within this series called Caden, who isn't introduced until about a third of the way into this book, and I really like him and his arc and the way that his character progresses, and seeing where this character goes. I think that this series will work really well for a lot of epic fantasy readers. I would not say it is a good starting point if you have not read epic fantasy before, because it is very complex. There are lots of layers, there are lots of threads, so it does get very complex. That there is a lot to keep track of, so much so that sometimes I didn't take notes, but maybe it would have been good to take notes, because there is a lot to keep track of with these characters and moving pieces and the lore and the magic and just the world as a whole. But it all does come together. It's just when things do come together, they're like reveal after reveal after reveal, where you're like, wow. Okay. But I did think it was really well written, well paced, across the whole series, I would say. So I would definitely recommend it if this interests you in any way. Another one that I read at the beginning of the year was The Paper Menagerie by Ken Liu. This is his short stories that he has written. I buddy read this with Evie from She Was Only Evie and Angela from Literature Science Alliance, and we all loved it. We all really thoroughly enjoyed it, and it was just a really interesting experience, and especially reading it with them and bouncing ideas back and forth. These were just really got me to thinking and got me hitting me emotionally, and also were just really, some of them were quite fun, some of them were quite dark. Fun's a weird word to describe these stories. A lot of them are quite dark. And what is going on with this helicopter? In this, Ken Liu sort of combines elements of fantasy and sci-fi and history, and he interweaves them into each of these tales. So some of them lean more on the fantasy, some lean more on the science fiction, some lean more on the history, and it's really interesting to see the elements that he chooses to put into each of these stories. It seems as though he's definitely interested in truth and history, and whether what we know about history is true, or who decides what's truth, culture and language, and how our identities are shaped. Whether that's our identities as a modern everyday reader, whether that your identity in some far future world, and who we are as people in our humanity. So I think the way that he combines all of these different themes is so well done, and I just really enjoy his writing style. It feels as though every word has a purpose, and that he's really thought about the words that he's putting into his stories, and that he can pack so much of a punch from 10 pages that it is really impressive, at least to me. So I definitely recommend it if you're after reading some short fiction. One of my favourite authors of all time had a book out this year. If you know, you know. John Gwynne. So The Hunger of the Gods, the sequel to The Shadow of the Gods, which came out last year. John Gwynne is one of my favourite authors. I have read everything he has written, everything, and I will continue to do so because I love everything this man writes. So this is the sequel, it is the second book in the Bloodsworn saga. This is an epic fantasy. Again, if there's a theme here, it's that there's fantasy here. I actually haven't had a favourite romance so far this year. Like, I enjoyed Book Lovers, but it wasn't a favourite. But besides the point, it is set in a Norse-inspired world, and you're following, in the main, 3 characters. Elva, who is part of this warband, and she is trying to break away from her father and the nobility and her original heritage. You follow Varg, who is a slave, and he falls into another warband and becomes an ex-slave. And you are following Orca, who is a mother figure, and at the beginning of the book there is a catalyst which propels her on a journey. And then this is the continuation, and this you get much more of an exploration of the gods and the lore in this world, which I really thoroughly enjoyed. And you also get the introduction of 2 sort of more villainous perspectives, which I also really thoroughly enjoyed. And I just really liked what we learned about the world, what we learned about our characters and where they were going, and just the more that we got on the world, I really liked. So I actually liked this more than the first book. I think that might be an unpopular opinion, but I liked this more, and I'm so excited for the third book. I don't know if we have any information on it as yet, but I would love to read it. I want it. But I would definitely recommend this, even if I would recommend John Gwynne. I recommend John Gwynne to everybody. Even if you didn't like Malice, I think you could like this series because you can really see how John Gwynne has grown as a writer from The Faith and the Fallen to here. Because, yeah, his writing style has definitely improved. However much I love Faith and the Fallen. Like, I think Faith and the Fallen is still my favourite John Gwynne just because I have such a connection to that series. But this was so good. So good. I have Daughter of the Forest by Juliet Marillier. This is the first book in the Seven Waters series by her, and I loved this. Daughter of the Forest is a fairy tale retelling. You're following a main character, Saoirse, and her family in rural Ireland. Set many years ago, during probably the medieval ages, when Ireland and Britain were at war, and it is very fairy tale, folktale-esque. I will say that the first 100 pages of this are very exposition heavy as we get to know Saoirse and we get to know her family and their situation as we start to grow attached to them. And then the plot kicks off a lot more in the second half of the book. And by that point, I was so attached to our characters. I was so attached to them, and I was really feeling for Saoirse. This is based on the 6 swans, which is where her brothers are cursed to being swans. And Saoirse is intent on trying to free them from this curse. And I was just so invested in both Saoirse and the world. Like, I really liked her. She needs to be protected at all costs. And the world, I really liked the way that it was written. It was so sort of atmospheric and woodsy and fairy tale-esque, and I was just reading because I had to know what was going to happen. I was so invested in these characters and in this world and figuring out that it was all going to be okay in the end, that I just was like, please be okay, because there was some very painful scenes to read in this. I will say trigger warnings for sexual assault because it is on page and it is quite graphic. So if that is triggering for you, then there is a scene in here that is upsetting to read. But I would definitely recommend this. And then I have read the second 2 books in this series, and which I have also thoroughly enjoyed. But I feel as though this one is definitely my favourite, as it has just this certain magic to it. And it is a multi-generational series. So this book is following Saoirse and her journey and her with her family and her romance, and then the second book follows the children of this generation, and then the third book again, children. And I haven't read the continuation trilogy as yet, but I would definitely recommend this, especially if you like books such as The Bear and the Nightingale. I think you would enjoy this series as well. The final book, and one that I do think is probably my favourite of the year, and it was a big surprise that it was going to be such a favourite, and that is The Wall of Storms by Ken Liu. Ken Liu gets a double mention. Oof. I mean, he's got 2 books on here. How greedy of Ken Liu. So this is the second book in the Dandelion Dynasty, and this has been my favourite book of the series so far. Dandelion Dynasty has taken over my 2022, I think. Or Ken Liu as an author has taken over my 2022. So I read The Grace of Kings back in March, and then in June I read this second book, The Wall of Storms. So The Grace of Kings is an historical epic fantasy set around the kingdom of Dara, and at the beginning of the book the emperor has die, and it follows the political ramifications of this and the warring factions that are trying to take control of Dara and the surrounding islands. And it is based on Chinese history, and it is very sort of historical narrative, very sort of politics heavy, as you follow the situation there and these different characters and their gains and their losses. And to me it read a lot like a historical text, and that you're following these historical figures as they go to seek control of this empire. Now, The Wall of Storms, it moves away from the history, I believe, and becomes a lot more fantasy-esque, and is also following the situation after that first book. And I was a lot more attached to the characters and to the world and to everything in this book compared to that first book. The first book I gave like a 3.5 stars, but it really stands as like a prequel for me, that it set up the history, it set up the characters, but it was very much a prequel, whereas the rest of the story of the series seems to really take off in this book. And this book, I was so attached to the characters, I just found them so engaging, so interesting. I just wanted to keep reading about them, and this world, it was such a well done world. Like the world building, like Ken Liu has crafted this world. He has made it so real. It's as though you can really imagine it. Like having that first book where you really got the history, is it you really got the history of this world, you really got to know it, and it just made it so believable, like it could be real. I will say, like, the first half of this book, this is quite a long book, it's over 800 pages. The first half of this book is very political, lots of political maneuverings and machinations, and following the politics at that time as there are moving pieces and moving parts going left, right and centre with different warring factions and trying to maintain control of this empire. And then there is an introduction of another element in the second half of the book which definitely propels things in another direction as you get introduced to this new element. And I love both parts of the book. I love both of those elements. I love seeing both sides of things and seeing what was happening. I really enjoyed the elements of, I think it's silk punk, where the magic is really based around technology and engineering, and it's just so clever. And I believe that Ken Liu actually like tests out some of the inventions, that he makes them on a smaller scale to test if they would actually work. So you do get really heavy into like the engineering and the inventive side of these fantasy things, because it is based around technology that does exist. So I find that really, really cool and really, really fascinating. I think it's so well written. Like, it's so well written. It's so well written. This book was something special. It was just something special. Like, I was surprised and I just loved it. I bloody read this with Patrick, by the way, and that was a really great experience, us reading it together, and he also loved it. Like, I think we both really thoroughly enjoyed this. I would say I think that these two have been my special books of the year so far. So if you're going to take any recommendations, I think these two are the ones that I would really push, because I found that these two were something special. These really have stood out for my 2022 as special books. So there we go. There are some of my favourite books that I have read in 2022 so far. Does this match with any of reading that you have done this year? Have you read these? Have I persuaded you to read them? Hopefully I've persuaded you to read these books now, because you should. You definitely should. And let me know what your favourite book of 2022 is, and thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my future videos. Bye!